Ladies and gentlemen, we meet again towards Parashat Va'etchanan. Parashat Nachamu, still in the atmosphere of Tisha B'Av, and in the atmosphere in Israel of a very difficult Tisha B'Av that we got into out of a huge conflict between two halves in the Israeli society. And the atmosphere is very tense. And I'd like to relate it to an central idea I find in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha has many central issues. We have the Ten Commandments, we have the Shema Yisrael, and I'd like to focus on an interesting pasuk, which says, "Va'asita hayashar v'hatov beinei Hashem leman yitavach." If you want to know what is the right way is to be morally right and good in the eyes of Hashem. What does that really mean? Does it really mean that to summarize all the mitzvot and everything that Moshe has been telling us up until now, you can summarize by actually saying two things? You can actually summarize by saying it's the good and it's the morally right. We can put them under two categories. The Ramban does not accept. Nachmanides says this is a new mitzvah. It's a new mitzvah of balancing what is good and what is morally right. Sometimes something which is good does not seem morally right, and sometimes something which is morally right does not seem good. And we have a special mitzvah, says Nachmanides, to balance what is good and what is morally right. You might think maybe because it says here hayashar v'atov, that what is morally right is more important than what is good. To balance that, in 2 weeks' time, Parashat Re'eh, it says ki ta'aseh hatov v'hayashar b'nei Hashem Elokecha. Moshe Rabbeinu says this a second time, but putting it in the different sequence of events. Therefore, there it says you should do the good and the morally right, and here it says you should do the morally right and the good. That's so that you shouldn't think for a moment one has a preference on the other. They have to both be balanced out. Says Rashi in this week's Parsha, what does it mean? V'asita hayashar v'hatov, zo peshara lifnim mishurat adin. That sometimes in judgment, you have to make a compromise. It's a mitzvah to make a compromise, says Rashi. And to take this a bit further, according to Rashi in Parashat Re'eh, where it says Ki ta'aseh tov v'hayashar b'nei Hashem Elokecha, says Tov b'nei Shamayim, good is what is good in the eyes of God, and Yashar is what is correct in the eyes of humanity, of the eyes of men. We have to find the right balance. That is the name of the game, finding the right balance. In fact, to such an extent, we as children, I'm sure we heard the story of King Solomon. King Solomon, after he was appointed as king in Melachim Aleph, Perek Gimel, King Solomon was appointed instead of his father, King David, and he felt very small and very inadequate to be the judge, because in those times the king was the main judge. So he felt very inappropriate for him to do it. He felt so young, and he went and he brought 1,000 sacrifices to Hashem. And after he gave these 1,000 sacrifices to Hashem, in the night he had a dream, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to him in his dream and asked him, "What do you want? Just tell me what you want. I'll give you anything you want." He could have asked for riches. He could have asked for health, for a length of his kingship. He could have asked for anything, and he asks for wisdom. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, "Because you asked for wisdom, I will not only give you wisdom, I will give you also wealth and health, etc., etc." That is the story we remember. However, that is not exactly accurate. That is not exactly the way it says in the pasuk itself. The pasuk itself tells us something a bit different than that. The pasuk says, what did he ask for? V'natata le'avdecha lev shomer lishpot את עמך להבין בין טוב לרע, כי מי יוכל לשפוט את עמך הכבד הזה. Translated by Safraya, grant then your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between good and bad, for who can judge this vast people? This translation, excuse me, Safraya people, is not accurate. It says, "V'natata le'avdecha lev shomea." Can we listen with our hearts? Here in that translation is an understanding mind. It's not an understanding mind. It's a listening heart. Can the highest level of chokhmah, of understanding, is when we're capable of listening with our heart. Here there's a terrible rift in Israel. We have two sides, and people are really not listening to each other with their heart. There are many reasons for this. People are not used to listening with their heart because of there's a whole list of reasons why modern technology and media has caused the fact that we are not listeners. We do not listen, and when we do not listen with our heart. But we really need to listen to each other with our heart, and this way we can actually judge the situation in the right way. I just want to end off with a short story of that my brother told me. I have a brother who's 10 years older than me, who is a great rabbi, and he did his apprenticeship. He did his what is called shimush, is to be apprenticed as a rabbi with Rabbi Rav Yeshua Neuvert, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, who wrote the Shmirat Shabbat Kilchato in Beit Vagan in Jerusalem. And when he had difficulties, he went to his rabbi, who was Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, who already passed away 26 years ago, one of the Gedolei Yisrael, one of the greatest rabbis we had in Jerusalem in the past century. And he went, so my brother tells me this, that they had a great question as far as laws that have got to do with women's issues. And they had to go, Rav Neuvert didn't know the answer, so they went together to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach to understand what has to be done in this situation. So they ask Rav Auerbach, and he gives them an answer. So my brother, who likes to summarize things, says, so if I understand correctly, if a woman comes to me in distress and says ABC, so according to what you just now told us, we have to say EFG. So he said, no, that's not what I said. That's not at all what I said. So my brother didn't understand. He said, I thought I understood that if a woman comes in distress and says ABC, so the answer is the EFG. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said, that's not what I said. That's not the wing thing to do. So Rav Neuvert and my brother was looking at him and said, so what do you mean? He says, if a woman comes to you in distress, first of all, make her a cup of coffee. Listen, and then we'll think. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to listen. We have to listen to each other. We have to listen to each other with our hearts. And it's only when we listen to each other with our hearts can we correct any rift which is in the family, between people, and hopefully you will be able to fix this terrible rift we just now have in our nation, and we'll have Geula Shleima b'meiru b'yameinu.